Hi everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there on live, so I had to send this video instead. Decolonizing priesthood, reconstructing the priestly role of women in the Bible. My journey into ordained ministry is not a straightforward one. So many oppositions and a denial of ordination, which made me to question the biblical tradition, which is often given to justify male-oriented leadership. Despite many studies into the subject of women leadership, discrimination against women in leadership roles continues even today. Being a student of Hebrew Bible, I would like to decolonize the idea of biblical priesthood. That is our basis for supporting or speaking against women's priesthood in today's context. Firstly, my approach to biblical priesthood is to acknowledge the fact that the Bible was written by men in favor of men. Therefore, it reflects their worldview and their stories. When we decolonize the text, it is essential to become aware of the worldview of men so that we can make the hidden colonizing strategies visible for the readers and find a way to confront marginalization of women in religious affairs. Secondly, who defined the role of priest? How can we deconstruct the role description in order to reconstruct it and to redeem it from the male oriented worldview? In this process, I will try to find the alternative woman voices in the leadership roles in the Bible. We can identify the call and vocation of women in religious and pastoral role in the Bible, such as Miriam amidst the leadership of Moses and Aaron, Deborah and the function she held besides being a prophet and a judge, and the wise woman mentioned in 1 Samuel chapter 14 and 24. We do not have any evidence to say that women are referred as priests. Women are carefully excluded from the system uh, throughout the biblical history. Though in ancient Near Eastern countries, women were often referred priests who involved in religious affairs. First of all, we need to acknowledge the fact that women are completely kept away from the temple and cultic affairs from the beginning of the centralization of the cult. Though we do not have any evidence of women addressed as priests, but we do have evidence to show that a woman did perform religious duties that is assigned to priests. When we start to tell the history of priesthood in the Bible, it is important to see why a group of men dominated religious affairs and why they were in control of the temple and its activities. Recognizing this will help us to understand how biblical history has dealt with the concept of priesthood and decolonize those histories so that we can reconstruct the role of women in religious leadership. The information about the priesthood in the earlier period was first written in the later period after the events took place. The earliest tradition of the Hebrew Bible presupposes that there was no regular priesthood, especially during the time of ancestors. There was no official priesthood, but the head of the family performed the acts of public worship. They controlled the cultic activities. It was primarily in the guardianship of a shrine and its sacred contents. In the course of time, a particular group of people called Levites chosen for the work of the sanctuary. Until the time of monarchy, the term Levites and priests used interchangeably, and they had almost a similar function. In the period of Judges, all the priests were not Levites, though the Levites were well recognized as priests by the time. But situation changed during the time of monarchy. Monarch strengthened the authority of the priest. Importance given to priests at the royal sanctuaries enhanced by the growth of the temples and their connection with the king. With the appearance of monarchy, king took over the management of the priesthood, at least in Jerusalem. Since the temple at Jerusalem became the main worshipping place, the priests at temple were given more importance. This created a hierarchy among priests, which continued even after exile. Division of the kingdom brought even similar division in the priesthood. In this history and development of priesthood, role of women being completely suppressed, marginalized from cultic affairs. When it comes to the role of priests, the sacrificial duty was one of the main duties of the priest in the earlier time. and most of the work around sanctuary was considered to be the priestly task. In the earlier period of the history, the main function of the priest was the oracle delivered by the priest. For example, in Exodus 33, where we find Moses played intermediary role when Yahweh speaks to Moses and Moses repeats the same information to his people. In the book of Judges, we find that the priests giving an oracle in response to the military investigation. Priests are expected to direct people in various situations. For example, people expected to get direction from priest in case of leprosy. One of the other role of priest is a proclamation. Priest was expected for a declaratory presentation of laws in certain public gatherings. And Deuteronomy 27 explains that Levites were responsible for this kind of functions. If at all, if we need to find any woman in the role of cultic function, that could be traced only during and the pre-monarchical period than exile and post-exilic period. It is important that we reclaim some of those roles that women played in pre-monarchical period and especially pre-exilic period. And I would like to reclaim the role of Miriam in this case and as an example. Taking Miriam as an example, who is traditionally been accepted as a prophet, but we could evidence that she also performed a religious function of a priest. At least for 3 points, I would like to make to reclaim the priestly role of Miriam. Firstly, in Exodus 15:20, where she is mentioned as the sister of Aaron, the high priest, and she danced with the timbrel, which is one of the traditional ritual implements of the ancient Near Eastern priestess. This is the way priestess leads a chorus song for other women to follow. This is to say that Miriam did perform one of the priestly duties which is familiar among ancient Near Eastern countries. Though the song has been recorded, but Miriam's role as a priestess is a sideline in the story. Secondly, she is mentioned in Numbers chapter 12, where Miriam and Aaron make a complaint against Moses. There are 2 sets of complaints. One is about Moses' Cushite's wife. The second is about Moses' failure to share leadership with Miriam and Aaron. Miriam and Aaron claim that God has called them to and spoken through them to, not only through Moses, but also through Aaron and Miriam. As a result, Miriam been punished with leprosy and banned from the camp for 7 days. Whereas it was a complaint made by both Miriam and Aaron. Aaron, who joined with Miriam to complain against Moses, escapes from the punishment. Later, he had been anointed by Moses as a priest. And not only that, his sons will automatically become priests. What we could see here is how a world of patriarchy filters women's role and strengthens male leadership so that the future generation does not support any woman leadership, but also not to question male leadership. Here is the point. Miriam too had a call to serve. She too had a vocation, and she too performed certain aspect of priestly role. But the world of men suppressed and silenced the role of Miriam and her claim to be a priest. Exclusion of Miriam into the role of priesthood is exclusion of all women from priestly role in the sanctuary. The rebellious attitude of Miriam, most of the time seen as the negative characteristics of Miriam, but it shows her struggle during the powerful male leadership to prove herself and her call to be a priest. Even with that loud voice to claim her role, she has been silenced in the history. She never mentioned after that. Thirdly, we are told that after 7 days, Miriam was brought back to the camp. When she re-enters the camp, she had to go through a ritual as per the Levitical law, Leviticus chapter 14, which is similar to the rituals all the male priests has to go through before their consecration as priests. Miriam's punishment to stay outside of the camp for 7 days is seen as a preparation for her priestly anointing. Unlike the male priest who goes through the process of staying inside the tabernacle for 7 days, Miriam stays outside and in an open space with the strangers and outsiders and not in closed space. This gives an alternative model of priesthood, which is in itself is a protest against traditional male leadership. At the end, Miriam was a priest, but the world of men did not recognize it, and tradition forgotten about the priestly role of Miriam. By reclaiming her voice is to reclaim priestly role of all women who are still struggling to perform the priestly role in its fullness. Not only Miriam, but also Deborah and wise woman mentioned in 1 Samuel 14 and 24. Sorry for the time limit. I couldn't cover Deborah and wise woman in my presentation, but will be there in my full article. Thank you.
Well, we thank Jasmine, but she might be listening through YouTube, and ask Shingi to help us reflect on the presentations by both Gerald and Deva. Thank you, Shingi. Okay. Your thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you, Sione. And briefly, my thoughts on Gerald and Yasmin's presentations, which were, I enjoyed them. And Gerald, I think, fitted in with the previous papers. And for me, briefly, I think what was of interest was when he spoke of Masala's poetry of silence and Nyerere's poetics of addition. I don't know what they are, but I would love to know more about that. And I was wondering, because I always wonder with issues of Bible translation, because I think so much is lost in Bible translation, and what qualifies as addition when you translate something, because I always think sometimes so much is lost when you translate from one culture to another. Then from Yasmin's presentation, I wondered, I'm not an Old Testament scholar, I'm a New Testament scholar, but I wondered if canonization contributed at all to the exclusion of women from the priesthood. That's just a question I have. I don't know if it's possible to answer it from a historical perspective or if it's not possible. Thank you, Sione.
Thank you, Shingi. Gerald there was some power issues where Gerald is. I don't know if he's still listening. He's still on the screen as far as I can see. I mean, but you raised two important questions here about translation and canonization. Yeah. I mean, those are quite related. So yes, I can hear Gerald. Do you have some thoughts on what Shingi has raised, Gerald?
Sorry, I got shut out. I wasn't able to come in on that. So I think the reason I turned to Nyerere's notions of translation is precisely because Shingi has raised this important point of the power of translation. The single biggest industry in biblical studies on the African continent is translation. And a great deal of translation work has historically been in the hands of sort of neo-colonial forces. And that's changed. I mean, we do have very significant African translators, but a lot of the very early translations we have, the first translations, are extremely worrying in all sorts of ways, ideologically very shaped by missionary colonialism. And so what's essential in African contexts is the notion of retranslation. We can't sit with translation. We've got to move on to retranslation. And we've got to be intentional about what it means to translate as African, which is why Nyerere, I think, is very exciting, because he's not afraid to be an African translator. He uses Kiswahili lexical items, both archaic and more contemporary, and he allows indigenous poetic form to shape what the Bible should look like. And I think we need to embrace these notions of translation. So that's how I would respond. Translation is power, and unless we take that power, we will always be beholden to missionary colonial power in translation.
Thank you. But that, I mean, that raises the question of, there was a collection in which Nancy Cardoso has a piece where she studied on how a lot of people make a lot of money through the publication of Bibles being translated. Yeah, so there's that academic element. Do you get the translation well? There's a cultural element on how the native languages, the vernacular languages, are being controlled by Bible translations, and then there's the economic side as well.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex element here. And do you have any thoughts on what Shingi is raising on the canonization question? The question was directed at Jasmine, but she's not here, so I'm just throwing the question at you, Gerald.
But sorry, canonizing in what sense? Sorry, Shingi.
Oh, okay. I had asked if canonization contributed in any way to the exclusion of women from the priesthood or the temple cult. Yes. Okay. Look, I thought that Jasmine's presentation was really very interesting. It raised a lot of important questions. I think canonization is an end question, but prior to that, there are a number of really important historical questions. And that is how we read these ancient texts in terms of their production. So that many of these texts try to represent a historical development, right? But that historical development is a canonized, Shingi, you're actually right, it's a canonized ordering, not a real historical ordering. And so notions of priesthood are read back into ancient society in order to try and show that ancient society had priests, whereas I'm not so sure they did have priests. And I think that Jasmine is trying to get at that kind of thing, that there are priestly sort of moves or rituals or figures, but if they are in pre-monarchic society, they're not priests in any recognizable way. Priests emerge in a particular kind of way with the monarchy, as she argued, and it's an economic role as well as an ideological role. So there you have the ideological and the economic going together. So the canonization process does fix that ordering. What Jasmine's trying to do is to undo that ordering, to try and show that what the canonists fix, there are other ways of reading those same texts within the canon. And I think it's very important work that she's trying to do, to recover early notions of, I wouldn't want to use the word priestly, but if she wants to, she can. Early pre-monarchic notions of priestliness. I think that's a very exciting notion. I would myself move beyond priestly stuff.
Okay, but isn't it? I mean, what is okay? I'm not asking as a historical critic, Gerald, but more as an ideological one. Doesn't the fact that the canonization was done by the priests influence the way that the priestly has been sanctified and reserved for these men who did the canonization, and in that way resulted in the exclusion of women? That's what I heard in Shingi's question. It may not be what she was asking, but that's what I heard. How would you comment that?
No, sorry, I missed that. I think that is an important dimension to it. The canonical process is something of a opaque process, and there are many factors, of course, that lead to canonization, including priestly roles. Of course, there is that, but you also have ideological roles, and you also have economic and political roles. So the canonization process is a process by which certain vested interests control the shape of the text as we have it. And I think that Jasmine is trying to unravel that. And I think your question, Shingi, is to say, what does that leave us with? And I think Itumeleng Masala would argue it leaves us, which what I was arguing in my paper, is the text as a site of struggle.
Of struggle.
Not only in how we interpret it, but in itself, within the text itself, there are voices of contestation. And the Miriam is a very good example. Miriam contends with other forms of priestliness. It's there in the text. It's debate in the text. We don't have to interpret the text like that. It's already there. The virtue of Jasmine's paper is that she's spotted it. She's seen it. It's a wonderful example, actually, of the text itself as a site of struggle. So the hard work is to grapple with the constraints of the canon and say we're not going to follow the ideological or the economic or the sort of ritual shape even of the canonical form. We are going to allow other voices that disrupt the canonical form to be heard.